should remove this from there.
Maybe, because it's a bit distracting.
Yeah. Here.
It was
This
probably
is
from
better.
the lunch yesterday. You don't have to keep on violating. No.
This one? Yeah.
Okay, so you have to.
So we're changing the way we're supposed to do it, but just ask him to return to it, but they won't stay with it. But if you're clear in the beginning that we'll keep questions after the four
We'll do
speakers.
questions at the end, and our speakers will stay.
So this is my 5 and my 2. And I really want this.
It's called nutrition.
Yeah, and I don't see the back really well. Now I see it. I should go push.
No, it's hard to see.
Or I can do it on my iPhone as well. How was your talk yesterday?
It was okay. This room is so big that there's just like so few people, which I didn't expect it to be big, but it's so big. It's like a big echo to look at. There's some questions. It was okay. My topic did not fit with the other ones. Like, this is kind of weird. Why it was in the same spot.
I went.
Where did you end up running? Because I might try to go at
The canal, along the
there's
canal.
easy to get to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You get out in front of the hotel, and then if you turn left, then you cross the street and you're joining the canal right away. If you turn right, you have to go upstairs and then downstairs, and then you join the canal again.
So it's out and back, basically.
Both ways, you're fine. Yeah. And the canal doesn't have water so much, like it just, and so it's not as pretty.
Yeah.
And there's some construction at some point that you have to run a little bit on the sidewalk, but otherwise that's what it's. And my full of hair.
You shouldn't.
Yeah. And yes. So are you part of that meeting at 10 o'clock? The Canadian Advocacy. I just have to go there after this. And
It's 10
till 11:30, and then there's lunch at 1 o'clock. Someone is bringing me a kayak that I have to bring back home for my son. I know at 3 o'clock my dad arrives. It's like 2 to 4. I'm doing the thing with Sarah. Oh my God! Yesterday we were looking at her slides and the other. And he's really like this guy has so much knowledge and he works.
The talk has a lot more female in it, because it was, Sarah said one person didn't show up.
Yeah, I think Dave did a job, so he wasn't there. He's older.
Yeah, and shorter.
She said he was with us in the country.
Yes.
It's just like, he runs all these metabolic and mood clinics.
She's like, he just kept saying, he did this clinic and this clinic.
And I was like, sure. So And she's like, no, it's
Yeah.
just that she doesn't like to give people too many pills.
Oh, so if you're gonna start with one, I guess if you have an option of another one, a different one, if you start with that.
But my thing is that metformin blocks the insulin resistance. That's its job. While the other ones, that's
Yeah.
not why they're working. For sure, when you lose weight, you improve your food. I spoke to her this morning. So you want us to? Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a watch, so you're good. Okay, thank you. So I'm
I guess I'll text her direct.
Kelly Moen.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I think we'll get started. Thank you for coming today. We are doing a mini review session. Today is nutrition. I'd like to start by welcoming Kelly Moen. Kelly has spent the last 8 years studying the psychology of obesity during his undergrad and graduate degree. He has focused on how obesity affects individuals, families, and communities through understanding a weight bias and the mental health effects that the discriminatory social attitudes towards people and obesity suffer. Kelly's a registered clinical counselor who works in the domain of bariatrics, eating disorders, disordered eating, self-regulation, motivation, and identity. He's an original founding member of the Public Engagement Committee and currently sits as the vice chair. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Moen.
Thank you. I've got my phone up here. I'm not checking Facebook. I've got a timer on it because I like to talk like Yanni does. So if you see me pick up my phone, I'm just checking the timer. When I learned that I was going to be a part of the nutrition talk, I wasn't too sure what I should really tell you because most of the time I am talking about identity and reconnecting the dissonant gap of who you should be compared to who you are. But when I reflect on that message, I think food and nutrition has a lot to play in that domain for me. So I know that, how many of you have ever heard my story before? Anybody? Some of you? Okay, awesome. So just here's like a 3-second rundown. I was always a bigger kid. Grade 6, I was 6'1", 220 pounds, fell outside the BMI grossly. A lot of medical intervention for diets, yo-yo dieting in the commercial diet world. Food became something that I was disconnected from due to all the diets I was put on. So I lost connection with my homeostatic system. Couldn't tell when I was full, couldn't really tell I was hungry. Food was available, you just ate. However, I was very athletic. I was on the hockey team, power skating team. I did figure skating all the way to dance 4, shared a room with Kurt Browning, and was a lifeguard, swim team, baseball team, rode my bike everywhere. So I think I just had a naturally genetic predisposition body to be larger. My domain historically is from the Vikings, Norway, and the Cree indigenous, so big men. That translates horribly with weight bias into saying that I don't fit into the normative body type. Well, when you're receiving messaging that you don't belong and food's readily available and you've disconnected yourself from your homeostatic system from so many diets, how are you supposed to learn to eat properly? What does properly even mean? And then there came a time when I thought, if I'm going to be big, I might as well be big, and got into weightlifting. I didn't vet the trainer who was training me, and I got into an accident where I was on the inverted leg press, pressing 1,100 pounds, and moved my heel just 1 centimeter, and now I suffer from sacroiliitis, which is just constant pain in my pelvis and hip area, which makes it sometimes hard to stand here or work out, walk, and I go for X-ray guided injections now of cortisone and anesthetic to numb it, and that helps me move. All of that to say, I then became a dad, and I wanted to always put the best foot forward and be able to play with my kids and stay healthy. So again, another diet, and that diet was the diet that wrecked my metabolism. And I'll say this out loud, with the amazing vitamin B injections with the promise that you'll always be thin, both my wife and I did this diet, and both of our metabolisms were wrecked. And I think it's a very dangerous diet. As well, we started to have these really amazing set-entry jobs with TELUS Communications, where I would answer the phone and sell you TV. And eventually I ended up being that guy that when the recording says your call might be monitored, that was me. And I became a coach, which taught me I actually have some really great leadership skills, some communication skills, some presentation skills, and I really wanted to see people succeed with their jobs, which led me to the education that I have today. However, we started to build a house because we had these jobs, and I thought I could do some landscaping, and I lifted the wheelbarrow wrong, and I re-injured my injury. So already yo-yo dieting, already yo-yoing in my weight, and now I can't move again. And it took me 3 years to recover from that, doing chiro and massage therapy and physiotherapy. And I ended up getting up to 535 pounds and said, this is dumb. This message that I'm continually receiving of move more and eat less is a bunch of, BS. What I really want to focus on with that message, because this is really amazing spot right now. This is a win-win for me. But while I was working at TELUS, I phoned my wife the other day. I said, I'm going to be talking about nutrition, and I really want to drive a point home with affordability. Because we had 2 kids, both of us were working at TELUS, $25, $26 an hour jobs, 75-hour paycheck. And when I look, she sent me my paycheck from way back when, 2006. And at the end, when I do the calculations, and I still remember our budget to this day, because I'm very involved with budgets. After our mortgage, maybe you want to do some math with me. So my paycheck ended up being $1,750 per pay period over 2 weeks. After deductions, I was left with $1,110. So just, some messy math, times it by 4. Here's my monthly budget. My mortgage was $1,250. Utilities, when it wasn't winter, was $600. Daycare for one kid was $600, and the other one was $900. Gas, $200 to $250, because we had to drive an hour and a half each way for commuting. And parking was $300 a month. That times it by 4 because my wife was making the exact same thing, so not just by 2 for me. So this is our combined income. That left us with roughly $600 a month for diapers and groceries and everything else that we could afford. So what do you think I was buying? Do you think I was buying organic? Do you think I was buying Whole Foods? I was buying what I could afford. And there was always a sale on Honey Nut Cheerios that promised to be healthy, which is not. So as our family, except for my kids, which I'm so blessed for, started to gain weight, and my injury, and gain weight, and my injury, and depression. So I just said, I'm done. I'm going for weight loss surgery because I can't seem to get this under control, and I've wrecked my system, and I can't seem to reconnect. I ended up telling my doctor I was going to go to Mexico. We fought in her office. She was my doctor since I was 18, so we could fight. And she stormed out of her office. I thought I was really in trouble. And she went into her office, and I heard her on the phone mumbling like the Charlie Brown characters. She came back. She's like, I fast-tracked you into the program. You're getting surgery in 9 months, so get prepared. And I'm against this. I'm like, okay, thanks, Sue. See you later. And at the same time, I was downsized from TELUS when we merged from Mobility to wireline, and my position got moved out east. So I had this amazing opportunity to go back to school. And through self-education and studying myself on the internet, I'm like, I need to change my environment because I can't get out and walk in the winter. My wife has a broken ankle permanently from a car accident 20 years ago. She can't get out in the winter. We have 2 kids that if we don't get them out, what are we really teaching them? I want to be in a place where I could do better gardening, create better food for myself. And with this liquidation and these packages that I received from work, I just said, I gotta figure this out. And that's when I moved to Victoria to go to school to study the psychology of obesity. I mean, I made up the program myself, it's just psychology. But I said, I need to study obesity. So I poured myself into reading over 160 some papers on self-regulation in food. Who likes chocolate? Why do we like chocolate? Why do we roll in it? Why don't we roll in it? Why do we like salad? Why don't we like salad? What happens when we're eating with a friend? What happens when we're eating by ourselves? What happens when we're eating with the TV? What happens when we're eating when we read books? What happens if we miss a meal? What happens if we eat when we have a new boss sitting next to us? Or what happens when we eat and our best friend sitting with us? So the self-regulation of eating has really been my domain and helped me understand that even though there was a point in my life that I only had $600 to feed my family, I'm now better educated. I'm making more money. And just as we were talking yesterday, I asked, how much do you spend on food in a month? My boys are 10 and 15 and eat me out of house and home. My grocery bill is $1,200 to $1,300 a month. But it's whole food now. It's natural now. I can afford it now. We have a better lifestyle. I'm very excited to tell you that last year on my mileage on my beautiful 2009 Ford Flex that I still own, it only has 160,000 kilometers on it because last year I only drove 4,500 kilometers, and that was probably just to go to Costco. We live in an environment where we walk, we ride our bikes. The food's basically naturally organic because we don't have a lot of bugs. We grow our own garden. However, not everybody has that privilege that I've been able to take the bull by the horns with. I lost all my savings. I had $99,000 to move to Victoria and do this education, and now I have $177,000 in student debt, and I wouldn't change it for the world because I'm healthier and I can afford more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for your personal perspective. We'll have Kelly stay up here as well as our other speakers as we go through each talk, and we'll save questions until the end and have a panel discussion and question and answer period at the end with everyone together. I'd like to welcome our next speaker up, Dr. Valerie Tarasuk. Valerie is a professor in the Department of Nutritional Sciences at the University of Toronto. Her research extends to Canadian food policy and population-level dietary assessment, but her primary focus is food insecurity. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tarasuk.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to talk to you about food insecurity. And I'm happy to be here, but I should start with a disclaimer. I'm not an obesity expert at all. My whole thing is food insecurity. So it's interesting to try to figure out how to talk about the interface with you. If you know nothing about food insecurity, you know something, just by virtue of being a part of our society. For decades now, the appeals for donations for food charity have become just a standard part of Canadian life. And food banks and food charity, the appeals for donations, are very much the public face of food insecurity in Canada. What you might not know, though, is that we've been systematically measuring and monitoring food insecurity for years now. Since 2004, on the Canadian Community Health Survey, there's been an 18-item module run to assess the prevalence and severity of food insecurity in Canada. This is a measurement tool that we have borrowed from the United States, where it's also used to monitor. What you're seeing on this slide is a very cursory summary of those questions, but I'm showing it to you because I really want you to know what I'm talking about. The thing that we are measuring that is food insecurity is people's struggles to afford enough to eat. The questions range in severity from people worrying about not having enough food because of a lack of money, through to a few questions about compromising the quality of what they eat. And most of the 18 questions on this module focus on quantitative deprivation, people skipping meals, cutting the size of meals, going hungry without eating, and in the most extreme cases, going whole days without eating, all because of a lack of money. The clause that is because there wasn't money is attached to everything, so that we're clear that that's the source of the deprivation that's being captured. The questions differentiate between adults and children because there's an abundance of literature that suggests that when families are deprived, adults will deprive themselves of food as a way to free up whatever they have for their kids, and this is particularly true for younger children. The most recent population data that we have right now is from 2012, but soon we will have something for 2017 and 18. What I'm showing you here, though, is the prevalence estimates for 2012. In 2012, 1 in 8 Canadian households reported some problem of household food insecurity. And what you can see from the bars on the right-hand side of the slide is that over the years that we have nationally representative data, the numbers have been going up. The bars are graded to show you levels of severity, and the severity is basically the number of questions of those 18 that people said yes to. I mentioned that the public faces food banks, but I thought I should show you this. This is the relationship between the number of Canadians, as we estimate, who are living in food insecure households, which by 2012 is over 4 million, versus the number of people who are reported to be using food banks in Canada. So while the public faces food banks, it's important not to think that that's actually the problem. Our problem is way, way bigger, and I would argue it's way more serious. There have been a lot of studies in Canada and elsewhere to look at the relationship between food insecurity and health. And I think now that it is absolutely indisputable that food insecurity is a serious public health problem in Canada. Independent of other social determinants of health like income and education, we can see that people that are living in households that are characterized as food insecure based on those awful 18 questions are way, way, way more likely to report a whole raft of chronic diseases and infectious diseases. If they have a condition like diabetes or depression, they're less able to manage it. So they're more likely to manifest with more severe side effects or more severe sequelae of those conditions. They're more likely to show up in hospitals, in ER departments. They're also more likely to die. We have a paper under review right now that by our estimate in Canada, food insecurity carves about 11 years off somebody's life. Children exposed to severe food insecurity over time are more likely to develop conditions like asthma, depression, conditions that will leave an indelible mark on them. So this is a serious problem, and it's pervasive in terms of its impact on health. Another way to talk about this is to look at the prevalence of chronic conditions. This is cross-sectional data from the Canadian Community Health Survey. Here you see things that adults, working age adults, have been diagnosed with just simply separating by severity of food insecurity. And you can see that almost every one of these patterns, we've got a gradient, whereby the most severe group are more likely to report it. Take a look at the very top line. Almost half of women in Canada who are living in severely food insecure households have been diagnosed with mood or anxiety disorders. Another way to make that point is this one. This is cross-sectional data from Ontario with us looking at healthcare utilization over a 12-month period. In the course of 12 months, working-age adults will burn up more than double the healthcare dollars of those who are food secure if they're in a severely food insecure situation. So we've got a health story. Okay. Shifting gears, what's its relationship to obesity and overweight? This is something that there's been a lot of literature on internationally, but we in Canada have not done much on it. But when I received an invitation to this summit, I thought, I could make a contribution here because we have some rather good data on body weight right now. In 2004 and in 2015, very large national surveys were conducted in the 10 provinces, not including the territories, but to assess basically the nutrition of Canadians. The primary focus of those surveys was a dietary assessment, but the surveys included a very rigorous measurement of body weight and height. And that's a very special thing, as I'm sure you know, that it matters that we measure as opposed to work with self-reported data. So we have very large samples, 35,000 from 2004 and 20,000 from 2015, and about 2/3, 3/4 of them received measurements of height and weight. So my very talented students, Joy Hutchinson and André-Anne Fafard-Saint-Germain, have done an analysis to look at the relationship between overweight or obesity and household food insecurity status. But first, let me show you what we've seen. I can imagine in this conference you've seen a lot of different prevalence estimates. These are the estimates for overweight and obesity, and we've combined the categories for the purpose of this presentation. These are the estimates from 2004 and 2015 for the whole population. And you can see what I'm sure you already know, that this survey reproduces the very high rates of overweight and obesity amongst adults, lower rates amongst children, but still concerning levels of overweight and obesity. This is the prevalence of food insecurity in those same two surveys, and it's more or less what we see from the annual cycles of the Canadian Community Health Survey. Somewhere around 13-14% of people are living, from those surveys, are living in households that are characterized by some level of food insecurity. And you can see there we're breaking it down by severe, moderate, and marginal. Okay, so now the question, how does that relate to this other problem of overweight and obesity? So I'm just showing you here data for 2015, and what the pies are is the total population from each of those age and sex groups who were characterized as overweight or obese. And then within that, we're carving out the proportion that were living in food insecure households. And so what you can see at a glance is that there's a bit of a bigger segment in those boys 5 to 17 and girls than there is amongst the men, and a bit bigger segment again for the women. But the lion's share of people who are obese or overweight are not food insecure, right? They're food secure. But still, there's significant overlap between these two stories. So our first step with this work was to do an analysis to say, are those differences meaningful? Is there a significant difference between the probability of being overweight and obese and food insecurity status? So what you're seeing here are odds ratios, with us saying what are the odds of being overweight or obese if you're living in a marginally food insecure household or a moderate to severe, and so on. And we're doing that by these 4 age and sex groups. The numbers that are bolded are numbers that are significant. And so if we take a look at the bottom row here, the severe food insecurity, just to give you a sentence for that, we would say that boys in the 5 to 17 year range who are in households that are characterized by severe food insecurity, so substantial food deprivation, are more than 2 times more likely to be food insecure, or to be overweight or obese, rather. 1.7 for the girls, and then we move over to the women, 18 to 64, and our odds ratio is 2.6. So yes, it looks like we have a significant association whereby if you are living in a severely food insecure household, your likelihood of at any point in time being overweight or obese is higher than somebody who's in a food secure situation. Take a look at the men, the 0.49 number there. What that's telling us is actually to be in a food insecure situation for men is protective against obesity or overweight. And that would be consistent, I'm sure, with what you already know, that that problem tends to move more with wealth than with poverty amongst men. Okay, now what we're doing is taking into account other household characteristics, because neither food insecurity nor obesity and overweight are sitting in islands by themselves. So in this analysis, we're saying, do we have an independent effect of food insecurity on body weight once we take into account household income, levels of education in the household, whether or not the household is Aboriginal, whether the age and sex of the respondent, immigration status, region in Canada where they live, because I'm sure you know there's profound provincial variation, and now adjusting for survey year. And you can see that the picture gets a little less, whereby now we only have statistically significant effects for severe food insecurity for boys and women, but we still have a very strong protective effect for men. So we would say we can't get out of this. I had thought once we did these adjustments, maybe we would lose the effects, but we don't at all. That we do have an association between food insecurity and overweight and obesity, at least for boys and women, that suggests that people in more severe situations are more likely to manifest with higher body weights. Okay, so what does it mean? Well, what we can't say from this sort of analysis is whether or not food insecurity is obesogenic, whether is food insecurity causing some people to be overweight or obese. All we're doing is connecting 2 points at one point in time, right? 2 ideas. So we can't say that food insecurity is causing, or severe food insecurity is causing boys and working age women to be overweight or obese any more than we can say being overweight or obese is causing them to be food insecure. There have been a few studies, very few studies, that have been repeated measures of food insecurity and body weight over time, asking the question of does food insecurity cause people to gain weight? But there are very few of them. They're American, and the evidence is quite mixed. Some have shown no effect and one has shown some effect, but the evidence is very mixed. So even internationally, the jury is out in terms of whether these problems, whether one of these things leads to the other. There are a couple of other features of the data that I've shown you that I want to highlight. The first is that we're only ever measuring household food insecurity over a 12-month period. And people's body weights take a long, they're a life history, right? As you heard from our first speaker. That's a long story. It's not a story that happens over 12 months. So that's a piece of concern when we try to extrapolate very much from these findings. A second issue is that we're measuring household food insecurity. So we're measuring the experience of food insecurity at the level of the entire family. But what our findings related to boys and women highlight is the importance of us digging deeper to understand individuals' experiences within those households. Because even the differences we're seeing between men, women, and children in this analysis suggests that individuals' experiences of food insecurity are very different. And that's something that I think for researchers is a frontier. Okay, where do we go from here? For those of you that are working in actual treatment or counseling, there's a problem because our data would suggest that if you were just seeing a random sample of the population who are overweight or obese, you would be more likely to see both children and women who are from food insecure situations and from severely food insecure situations in particular. But I would suggest to you that food insecurity really limits the bandwidth for healthy weight management. First of all, I want to remind you of the slide I showed you earlier about the extraordinary intersection between food insecurity and chronic disease. Adult women, especially in severely food insecure situations, are very, very likely to be managing multiple chronic conditions and very, very likely to have mental health issues. So there are a lot of balls in the air when people are in this situation. Decisions about food and food purchasing are made in the context of a whole lot of other financial pressures, chief among them being paying rent. When we look at studies that have dug more deeply into how people are allocating precious resources in the context of an impossible situation, what we can see is that price trumps health every time. So to be trying to encourage people to move towards healthy eating while they are severely food insecure makes no sense. They're doing the best they can simply to survive, and they're not doing very well at that. So it's certainly a consideration going forward. So to summarize, food insecurity and overweight and obesity absolutely coexist in our country. We have some evidence that severe food insecurity in particular increases the likelihood that people will be identified as overweight or obese if they are boys or adult women. But only a small fraction of the bigger problem of overweight and obesity in Canada is linked to food insecurity. And we would suggest that it's perhaps untenable for people in these circumstances to engage in healthy weight management given what else they're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'd like to welcome our next speaker up, Dr. Lana Vanderlee. Her talk is Advancing Food and Nutrition Policies for Prevention of Diet-Related Ncds in Canada and globally. Dr. Lana Vanderlee is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Waterloo. She is currently leading a multi-country study to examine the impact of nutrition policies on nutrition-related behaviors and dietary outcomes. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Vanderlee.
Great, thanks very much. I'm really pleased to be here today to share a little bit about my research program looking at some of the different food and nutrition policies that can be used for the prevention of diet-related non-communicable diseases, including obesity, both in Canada and globally. In terms of disclosure, my research is funded by CHR and FAC, and while I do interact with the food industry for some of our evaluations of food company policies, and I'll tell you a little bit about that research, I don't accept any funding from the food industry. So I'm going to talk today about the food environment, and I just want to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page in terms of what I mean when I say food environment. So this is a definition commonly used, developed by Boyd Swinburne, and it's the physical, economic, political, and socio-cultural factors that influence people's food decisions and then their overall nutritional status. And so those individuals, we navigate these environments that are made of these different factors. And there's really three major contributors or players that we typically talk about when we talk about the food environment: the food industry, the government, who creates policies that manage these food environments, and then society and some of these socio-cultural factors and social norms. So this is the framework that I'm going to be using today. But what does that actually mean? What do I mean when I say food environment policies? I think often when we think about the food environment, we think about the environment where we're immediately making our food decisions, so places like supermarkets or restaurants, that sort of built environment. But food environment is much more broad than that when we're talking about policies. So often we talk about things like food reformulation or the nutritional quality of the food supply, the nutrition information environment that we navigate, or marketing to kids. It's even more broad than those sort of typical policies we talk about to talk about food pricing strategies, what foods are available in public settings or when we're in schools, things like agriculture and trade policies. So it really is a very broad area when we're talking about these policies. And it works throughout the food production process. So it's from what foods we produce and how those foods are distributed, what's imported and what's exported, so what we actually get to eat within our environment, the quality of those foods, the environments that we navigate when we're making those food decisions. Clearly a very complex place to make healthy decisions. It's the ubiquitous availability of unhealthy food or less healthy food, and how those foods are really promoted to us and pushed to us. And full disclosure, this is a picture I took at the University of Waterloo several years ago. So this guy's trying to have a workout and staring at a Whopper. And it's also the type of nutrition information, how we're supposed to make food decisions when this is the information that we're getting on food products. And I mean, I have a PhD in nutrition policy, and I have a really hard time figuring out what all this information means. So I think that for the general public, it's even more confusing. The good news is that right now we're seeing a lot of leadership and a lot of policy action to improve food and nutrition environments. And I'll give you a few examples. So in Chile, they have now banned marketing to kids on food packages. So Tony the Tiger is no longer welcome on their Frosted Flakes. And they also have implemented these front-of-pack labels, so they have these stop signs that say that they're high in sugars and calories or fat and sodium. So this is just one example of one of the countries that's shown a lot of leadership. And in Mexico, I think we often are hearing now about some of the results of their sugar tax. So they tax sugary drinks and foods that are energy dense, so they're more expensive, and therefore people are less likely to purchase them. And some of the initial evidence is certainly suggesting that this is helping to shift some of those patterns in a country where there's very high levels of intake. Now in Canada, we also have our own leadership, and it's quite an exciting time in terms of food environment policy. We have the healthy eating strategy, and I'm sure some of you heard our colleagues from Health Canada speak about this, changes to nutrition labeling, restrictions on marketing to children, some changes to the food guide, and limits on for sodium. So we have this sort of momentum of suite of policies that's going to be implemented, or hopefully proposed to be implemented. We also have led by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, a food policy for Canada. It's not entirely clear how this is going to roll out, but they did just announce some money in the 2019 budget for 4 areas: helping Canadian communities access healthy foods, making Canadian food the top choice at home and abroad, supporting food security in Northern and Indigenous communities, and reducing food waste. So it's not clear exactly how this is going to roll out, but it certainly has some implications for food environments. And so, because we're seeing so much change and so much policy in this food environment space, there's a lot of efforts to increasingly monitor food environments. So I'm part of a network, the Informis, the International Network for Food and Obesity and Non-Communicable Disease Research, Monitoring, and Action Support. Informis is led by Boyd Swinburne in Auckland, and basically they wanted to pull together sort of a critical mass of researchers who are doing food environment research and try to establish some sort of consistent methods so that we can know that we're getting really rigorous data when we're trying to evaluate food environments and food environment policies, and that maybe we can do some cross-country comparisons and do some between-country learning when some countries are implementing these policies. So today I'm going to talk about policies by 2 of the major players, governments and the food industry. So I'd like to share a little bit with you about some government policies. So this is a project that I undertook for my postdoctoral fellowship with Mary LeBay at the University of Toronto. The Food EPI project was a Food Environment Policy Index. This is a tool developed by Informis to examine how much progress governments are making towards achieving some of the best practices in improving food environments related to specifically obesity and NCD prevention. And so it doesn't include things like breastfeeding. It doesn't do a thorough analysis of food security. It's really tailored towards policies that address obesity and diet-related NCDs. So we wanted to look at how Canada compared to some of the best and promising practices across a variety of these policy domains that I talked about. So it includes food composition and labeling, promotion, provision, so that's availability in public sector settings, food retail, the price of food, and then some of these trade and investment and agriculture policies. And then infrastructure support domains. These are the pieces that governments need to have in place in order to successfully implement and have really effective policies. So things like leadership, governance, monitoring so that we know how things are changing over time, what kind of funding and resources are implemented, places for communication between different stakeholders, and then the health in all policies approach. So for this process, really what the Food EPI does is it identifies what policies are in place in a country, so in Canada, then it rates those policies compared to some of the best practices internationally. So as an example, Quebec's marketing to kids policy and how they have restrictions against that, that's one of the benchmarks. And this rating is conducted by experts from across Canada. And so right now, globally, there's 23 countries who have done this very same Food EPI process. So this is getting some global momentum towards identifying some of these policies. So what we did is identified all of the relevant policy documents related to these different food environment policy domains as of January 1st, 2017. And we had to do that in Canada, obviously at the federal as well as across all the provinces and territories, because things like school food policies happen at the provincial or the subnational level. So then we got all this information on all of the policies in Canada, which was an exceptional amount of work. And then we went to government officials across different areas, and we had them validate that to make sure that we really had collated all of the available information on what Canada's policies were. And we brought together an expert panel. We had them do some online ratings for provincial and territorial policies. And then we did in-person workshops for federal policies. And then after we rated how Canada was doing, we had them create some recommendations, and we prioritized those to say, what might the way forward be in some of these areas? So we're about 2/3 academics, about 1/3 of NGOs, and then a few people from other civil society organizations. And we had people from all of the provinces and one of the territories, so fairly broad representation. So what did we actually find? Well, in terms of food environment policy in Canada, we do have this report that's out, and I'd encourage you to have a look if you work in food environments. We have not only the reports, but also those evidence documents of all of the policies that we collated as of 2017. So it's quite good wealth of information if you're working in this area. And here's the results. And I know you can't read the text, but I'm going to show you some of the messages from these results. So darker bars mean Canada's doing better compared to some of the international benchmarks, and lighter bars means Canada's not really doing much compared to what some of the most promising practices are. So you can see that we are doing sort of moderately well. We're better at infrastructure support than the actual policies. So we have some of the structures in place. What we actually need now is to see some movement on policies. Now, I'll actually note, though, that this was prior to, so the healthy eating strategy was announced in October 2016. So this was prior to some of those policies. So they would be in the early phases, and that's why when we follow this up in a few years, we might actually see some concrete changes here in Canada, and in fact might even become sort of one of the benchmarks in some of the areas. So right now we don't have a national policy for menu labeling. We don't tax unhealthy foods beyond what we just have for GST. We don't require any healthy foods to be provided in government-funded settings. For the most part, we do somewhat in schools, but it's certainly not consistent. We don't really have supports in place to help retailers, and we don't have a health in all policies approach, so nutrition isn't a consideration in all policies, which we think it should be. So, what did we prioritize? Well, as experts, they weighted sort of importance as well as achievability in this criteria, and these were the top 3 for policy: to prohibit advertising to children up to the age of 17, to implement targets for sodium and free sugars and saturated fat, in a structured voluntary approach, and implementing an excise tax. So we do have the limits on sodium as part of the healthy eating strategy, and they have proposed to limit marketing to kids. It's a little bit unclear what that's going to look like, and it's not up to the age of 17. So in terms of infrastructure support, to develop population intake targets for these nutrients of concern, to revise Canada's food guide, and then to make sure that the healthy eating strategy sort of has a long-term agenda. And we do have a new food guide which does meet most of these recommendations and is close to our international benchmark, if not the new international benchmark. And here's the provincial and territorial results. So what you can really see is if you look sort of horizontally, that's how well we're doing in any one domain. And if you look north to south, you can see how certain provinces are doing. Really, the takeaway from this is that there's a real smattering of policies. We're not seeing consistent policies between provinces and territories. We also have now done the first global comparison. So this is 11 countries who also participated in Food Epi. I think that it's a bit disappointing that you can see no countries are achieving a high score. So we don't really see any country who's taking a lead in all of these policies. It's really like they're choosing 1 or 2 sort of pet policies that they're moving forward. Our composite score, when we weighted federal and provincial governments equally, was sort of middle of the pack. So Canada's meeting international benchmarks in some policy spaces. We see a real patchwork of policies, so not all Canadians are actually being exposed to the same policy environments. There's some challenges with who's actually responsible for some of these, but we do see some progress. So the next piece I'm just going to briefly speak about is the food industry. And so this is some research that we're doing because it's increasingly acknowledged that food industry is both a major contributor and a major obstacle to progress in achieving healthier food environments. So while food industry, through their lobbying tactics and some of their pressure efforts, they certainly oppose a lot of this public food environment policy. But WHO has also identified some concrete actions for food industry, and it's been acknowledged that if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and other areas related to health, that food industry has to be on board to some extent, or at least they have to be a part of a solution. So I worked with Gary Sachs at Deakin University, and we developed a tool to benchmark food company policies. And you may have heard one of my PhD students, Laura Vergeer, speak a little bit about one of her pieces related to this research. But basically, we looked at policies across 6 different areas. So corporate strategies, product reformulation, nutrition labeling, marketing and promotion to kids and adolescents, availability and accessibility of projects, and relationships with external groups. And we do this among the 4 main sort of groups, so food and beverage manufacturers, supermarkets, and quick service restaurants. So these are the companies with the biggest market share in Canada, and we've only done packaged food and beverage so far, but we do have a report that came out a few weeks ago, again on our website if you're interested. And here's sort of the overall finding. So the scores ranged from 4 points with some of the poorly performing companies to 60 points for the best performing company. So overall, it indicates there's clearly room for improvement. We did see this wide range of scores. Companies are best at saying that they're doing healthy things in their corporate strategies, unsurprisingly, and there's very few companies that are really trying to do anything to increase the availability or the price of healthy foods. And overall, we evaluated companies whether or not they wanted to participate. So some companies validated their policies and some didn't. And we found that people performed better when they were telling us all of their policies. So it really indicates that there's a real need for transparency from companies in just what they're trying to do and what they're doing so that we can make sure that they're doing it. Here's how Canada compares to Australia and New Zealand. So overall, we scored more poorly using the same indicators and even the same people rating because we did some cross-country rating. So overall, we don't seem to be doing our food industry here in Canada doesn't seem to be doing quite as well. And we did provide sort of company-level scorecards, and we are trying to, we worked with companies to get this information to them so that they can make some different, hopefully acknowledge some of these issues and potentially influence some of their policies. And we have a list of recommendations. I don't have time to talk about them, but I think the big question, obviously, with this research and also with the government research is, we have these policies in place, but are these companies actually meeting what they say? Are they doing what they say they're doing, where the rubber actually hits the road? And that's the next piece of this research program, so hopefully I can share that with you in a little bit. So overall, what's the sort of message that I'd like to share? Well, we need comprehensive and sustained policy action, both from our governments at all levels, as well as from the food industry, if we want to shift some of these food environments. Some of our recommendations do align with the healthy eating strategy, but certainly we need actions that go beyond this. And so as this continues to evolve internationally, Canada's going to need to keep up. And we see that from international examples that such leadership really is possible. I see this research going in different directions, but I think it's important now to not only evaluate what policies are in place, but what's the actual impact of those policies on environments, on diets, and on health. We need to know a little bit more and dig a little deeper into what companies are doing, and Monique Potvin-Kent and Elise at U Ottawa are doing some great work around that. The link between healthy eating and sustainability, which is increasingly acknowledged, and just how we need to keep pushing this agenda forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to some questions at the end.
Thank you very much for that talk. Our next speaker is Dr. Yoni Friedhoff. The title of his talk is Shock and Awful: How Our Food Environment Provides the Strongest Case Against Personal Responsibility as Obesity's Cause or Cure, and What We Might Do About It. Dr. Friedhoff is the...
It's okay.
Are you sure? You all know him?
It's okay. Thank you. I know we don't have a lot of time, and I've got a lot of slides, but I'm going to whip through them as fast as I can. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the attention. Yeah, so first disclosures, I have a lot of speaking disclosures. As far as commercial interest disclosures, I have a book that's theoretically purchasable, and I'm the co-owner of my office. I think it's also important to point out I have a strong intellectual conflict of interest in that I write about this stuff a lot, and it's tough to decide that you're wrong, so bear that in mind while I go through things. So what I want to talk about today is why I don't necessarily think we should or need to wait for government or the food industry to change. I know Dr. Vanderlee is talking about things that are exciting, and I agree with her 100% that there are things going on and moving forward, but I think we can move things forward ourselves, especially we being the people in this room. The people in this room, generally speaking, are privileged. We have initials after our names. We're healthcare professionals. We're researchers. People, whether we deserve it or not, might listen to us more, and there are things that we can do. And to help illustrate why that's important, I do want to take you through what I call a shock and awful slideshow, where I go over some of what's wrong with our food culture today. These are slides I've used before. Some of you may well have seen them, but because I don't see a lot of change in this area, I'm quite happy to use them again. And so I'll start by pointing fingers at a doctor who is giving out a free ice cream cone with their vaccination. This is a pediatrician's office. Someone sent me this slide or this picture from the United States. We've got the JDRF, who are fundraising by selling chocolate bars. We've got CHEO, the Children's Hospital here in Ontario, as do many hospitals, recommending we go and buy Miracle Treats so we can fund our children's hospitals through the sale of junk food. We've got Slices for Smiles, which is the sale of pizza at a deep discount over an entire month period by hospitals, again, 12 hospitals in this case. So this is the Miracle Network hospitals. The Miracle Network hospitals, they also are involved with Tim Hortons Smile Cookies, with the Miracle Treat Day. Slices for Smiles is the only one where I've seen actual dollar values. In the first 7 years of Slices for Smiles, which involved that 1 month promotion of cheap pizza, as well as a year-long little box in the stores suggesting they are partners for health, they raised $1 million, which divided over 12 hospitals over 7 years, works out over 365 days to about $35 per day per hospital for the promotion of fast food pizza on a regular basis and the brand washing or the health washing of pizza. We've got the Pledge to MS, where we can indulge in an extra large poutine. It's true, by pledging to eat poutine, you can help to end multiple sclerosis. I don't know that you knew that. You could, if you don't like poutine, buy an ultimate deep fried cheesecake for the same purpose, because that will also help to end MS. This is a good one. This is Pat's King of Steaks, making a difference one cheesecake at a time. And the mission of Spread the Whiz is to educate, inform, and demonstrate healthy eating habits and nutrition in school-aged children. We've got the Canadian Cancer Society, who a number of years ago suggested that you can meet your 5-a-day vegetables by ordering Domino's Pizza Canada. What you may not know is all of these partnerships have a required social media component. So when speaking with people who are involved in these programs, they are often embarrassed by them, especially by things like their social media tweets, but explain that there are benchmarks that they have to meet as part of this partnerships. Partnerships benefit both partners. It benefits the Canadian Cancer Society perhaps by money, but for Domino's it's sales and, again, health washing. We've got McTeacher Nights. I don't know if any of you have young children who go to a school with a McTeacher Night. McTeacher Nights involve the school administrators and teachers selling McDonald's to the school. There was a study out of the States by Michelle Simon looking at how much money was actually raised per student. It's about $1.77 per student to host these McTeacher Nights. Parent councils, of course, get involved in things where this particular parent council, I think this might have actually been one of my kids, I can't recall, but you know, it's the sale of 2 hot dogs, dessert, a juice box. You can get some donut holes and puff wheat squares and a fruit popsicle or an apple or an orange juice. This is here in Ottawa. This is just one bank of vending machines at our local arena. So certainly these are the food availability options. Run, Jump, Throw is run by Athletics Canada. Run, Jump, Throw is a program for children that partnered with Hershey's. If you look at the logo, those, yes, are Hershey's Kisses. The logo was changed when Run, Jump, Throw created their partnership with Athletics Canada. And if you wonder what will happen at the events, I don't know, I have not gone, but thankfully there are pictures of another Athletics Canada partnered program. That's with the Hershey's Track and Field Games, and here it's marketing and brand washing. This is a useful venue for the food industry. This ties emotion and excitement and joy and spirit and fun with these products. We've got Chips Ahoy being the official snacks of Canada Soccer. We've got the I Just Played, I'm Thirsty program. So if you've got a child in either soccer or hockey here in Canada and you sew a little patch onto the side of their jersey, you can then go to Tim Hortons after your game and get them a free hot chocolate or a free lemonade depending on the season, and probably other things too. I believe Tim Hortons sells things other than sugar-sweetened beverages. We've got the American Heart Association. I know this is Canada, but it's an interesting one because it's a partnership between the NFL and the American Heart Association, and their mission or their cutesy tagline is that it's designed to tackle childhood obesity. So this is launched specifically in the name of childhood obesity. The funding, though, comes from the dairy industry. And Fuel Up to Play 60 involves the sale of chocolate milk for the dairy industry, which perhaps is not going to help tackle childhood obesity, especially if you don't even play. I mean, the events that they have for Fuel Up to Play 60 involve the provision of chocolate milk in very large quantities to kids who are, again, extremely excited by seeing their heroes who are signing their jerseys, and now that excitement is translated to this really important beverage that apparently they must drink to be football stars. We've got the American Youth Soccer Organization trying to get in on this too, where it's literally sugar-sweetened syrup that is now being recommended as a need to refuel something. This was a child who, this is what they received with a single day of their practice or their competition. If you've got children in organized sport, you will know that if you bend a blade of grass, someone will rush them with food. We've got the government getting in on the recommendation of having all these wonderful foods. This is Statistics Canada talking about Hot Fudge Sundae Day. This is again Stats Canada talking about Junk Food Day. Are you eating something yummy for your tummy on Junk Food Day? I would argue every day in Canada and North America and probably around the world is Junk Food Day. Maybe we should have a not Junk Food Day rather than celebrating Junk Food Day. The CFIA got in on it too. Why not take the family out for a treat on Junk Food Day? That's a useful message for Canadians, apparently. Justin Trudeau wants people to buy donuts to help support the Special Olympics. This is a very pervasive thing, this use of food for fundraising. We've got school pizza programs. This came out, I remember, right when Ontario's new-ish school food policy was launched. Fast food pizza in schools is interesting. People talk about, oh, it's healthy pizza. We're teaching kids, even the kids who don't buy pizza in schools, on a daily basis for at least 8 years from K through 8, that regular junk food pizza or fast food pizza on a weekly basis is a normal thing to do. That's not necessarily a great message to be teaching the kids here in Canada. Pizza Nova apparently is now invited into kindergartens here in Ontario to teach children about food groups. This information was shared to me by one of the Obesity Canada team members whose child was in one of these kids' pizza making workshops, which apparently visited 600 workshops, more than 27,000 children. And this particular individual's kindergartner came home to tell him, guess what, Daddy? Pizza is the healthiest food because it's got all of the food groups. And, it really is a confusing thing because teachers care about our kids. So we're not talking about people trying to do wrong by our children, but this idea that we can involve the food industry the way we do is so normal that nobody thinks twice about it. And when this particular teacher was challenged by this individual, really there wasn't much in the way of any defense other than the kids had a lot of fun, and this is a lesson plan that I was able to employ. When you finish, of course, you get a certificate of completion and a coupon to go to Pizza Nova. They've got the Book It programs where if you read, your teacher has these coupons they can give to kids to give them free pizzas. I think reading is a reward unto itself. I'm not sure we need to have teachers rewarding children with books, with pizza for reading books. Here's Boston Pizza's Partners in Reading program. We have weird things. So this was the Cheetos Museum at the Ontario Science Centre just this past year. And actually, the Cheetos Museum could be awesome because there is a lot of science around the production of ultra-processed food, the extrusion, the science of ultra-palatability or hyperpalatability. What this particular exhibit that was hosted at our Science Centre involved was bins of Cheetos, and you were meant to look through them to find Cheetos that looked like fast food, or look like celebrities or other characters. And so this is an amazing thing. We've got rewards that are given to kids wearing helmets or doing good. In this case, it's a 444-calorie reward. It's a Frosty from Max Milk, given by the Brampton Police in this particular picture. It's a citywide initiative. Cities also have arenas. We could be giving out coupons for swims or skates. This is a different one that's partnered with McDonald's. This is in BC, McDonald's and Domino's Pizza. We've got things like Fort York here or not here, but in Toronto. During the War of 1812, young kids entered Fort York full of courage, strength, and pride. This weekend, they'll leave full of cookies, cake, and candy. We've got kids now, apparently, if you make it to the 100th day of school, that's a celebration, which, of course, involves food. I'm not sure why we are celebrating making it to the 100th day of school. This is in Guelph, where if you tell the librarian you're studying for an exam, she or he will give you junk food. I can't understand the rationale beyond this is now normal. This was a tweet that was sent out just this past year here in Ottawa from a school principal who was administering the EQAO standardized testing. Each of those packages contains some Oreos. I, of course, responded questioning whether this is a wise thing to do. I was then blocked on Twitter by the principal. And what was more interesting was when a different person, this was a psychologist, the head of the school board psychologist, wrote to me saying, I don't see what the problem is here. And I think rewarding people with food for doing something they have to do anyhow, especially if they're in grade 3, is the problem here. But the fact that this psychologist wrote to me saying, I don't see the problem, I think speaks to how normal it is, not to them not being a good psychologist. And this is perhaps the most shocking one I came across, which is the jelly bean prayer. Red is for the blood he gave. This was given out to kindergartners at a Catholic kindergarten in the States, and it was given out to a very prominent health reporter's son, and she sent it off to me. So all this to say we have an extremely unlevel playing field. This food environment, though it is normal, is not normal. This is not a healthy food environment. I do think we got here slowly. This is sort of, we are the frogs in the pots of slowly raising temperatures. This wasn't the case 30 or 40 years ago. Yes, there was food, and yes, people were involved, and yes, there was treats, but not to the degree that we see constantly today. And anybody in this room who has young children know that it is a always event. So it is not just one. My wife and I actually polled our children on a nightly basis for a year to see how many times they were offered food by people other than us, junk food, and tried to quantify things. And to the best of our abilities, over the course of a year, they were offered 41 pounds of added sugar, which was included with an awful lot of calories, and again, for things that were ridiculous and nonsensical, like many of the slides I showed you here. And so we can't just say no if there's hundreds, if not thousands of times in a year, especially with our kids when we're not there. I don't think we should have a situation where the response to swimming against a strong current is swimming lessons and trying to constantly say no. And is it a healthy thing to need this of our children and of ourselves? Does this create a healthy relationship with food? I'm all for treats, but I would rather have a world where the treats were available, but I had to go get them myself and find them and go out of my way, than have a world where I have to go out of my way to make healthy choices. And kudos to Obesity Canada this year, because this is the first year that I would not have been able to put a slide of the food or the snacks being served to be part of this presentation, which is what I usually do. do. And so we've got this flood, we are swimming against a current. What do? I think we need to fill sandbags, and I think this is sort of the message I want to drive home here. We can fill sandbags. And so the recipe for filling sandbags is very simple. If you want to make changes in your kids' schools, with their coaches, with their friends' families, their dance clubs, whatever it might be, the first step is to lead with kindness and praise. You guys are awesome. You're an amazing teacher. I can't believe how great you are with my kids. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Then point out this one perhaps contradictory behavior. You know, the fact that you're giving kids food rewards, it surprises me given I know how much you care about our kids. Then you need to offer an alternative. Then you need to offer to help. And briefly, and I really will be brief, I promise, I can see the clock ticking. There is change happening. So this is in Middlesex County. They launched a grassroots campaign to encourage healthy food on the sidelines. And then over time, with a social media approach, it was actually adopted by the league in Calgary. They are now giving out some positive tickets where they're giving people swim tickets. You can have fundraisers in schools that involve the sale of, in this case, garden patches. But Google is your friend. Non-junk food fundraising, there's a ton. Same with rewards. This is a camp, summer camp that now only serves sugar-sweetened beverages 2 days a week and in those smaller cans. For teachers, if you've got a teacher who's rewarding your children with food, perhaps they could be rewarded with extra recess, free gym time, a dance class, funky hair day. There are things that can be done, and Dr. Vanderlee talked a little bit about some of the sort of institutional, government-based sandbags, which are much bigger. We could create better school food programs that did not invite the food industry on a weekly basis to feed our children and teach them things implicitly. We could stop the chocolate milk programs and stop inviting the educators to come into our classrooms. We could have a national school food program that provided healthy meals to kids across the country. We could ban advertising to kids. We can change front of package labeling and back of package labeling. This was Smucker's who told me that it's totally okay to label their ingredient of sugar as white grape juice concentrate. We could get rid of front of package claims altogether, which would be lovely. I'd love to have a system where we didn't have health claims. We could have a sugar tax. We can do a lot of things, but I think that we don't need to wait for all those things. And I would encourage you, if you can, to try to make changes in your own home turf and your own environment. The more people we make aware that this new normal is not healthy, the more likely the politicians will have the ability to affect those bigger changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your talk. We will take questions. There's microphones on either side of the room, and please feel free to ask any questions.
I understand there's a food bill stalled in the Senate. Why is it stalled?
Is this on? Oh, yeah. I mean, we know, and perhaps you know more than I do. What I do know is that our government right now is facing incredible levels of opposition in terms of the marketing to kids bill. Is that the one you're referring to? Yeah. So if you go on the website, the Transparency Policy website that Health Canada has, you can see just the type of opposition they're facing. There is huge lobbying that's going on right now, and so Manny Arango talked a little bit about some of the NGO lobbying that's going on in support of the bill, but basically it's just a real challenge. There aren't a ton of governments that have moved with a policy that's quite so extensive, and so I think they're just facing huge opposition.
And this is also where you can potentially make a difference with our initials and who we are. There's campaigns right now to try to encourage this bill to go through, calling your MP, calling your MPP. They might be more likely to take your call in a more expeditious manner. It certainly can't hurt. But yeah, this is just the nature of politics and industry, and that's not mean-spirited. It's just the way it is. And if we can encourage further change, we have a shot at affecting the change in this particular circumstance.
Morning. I'm really glad to put my alarm this morning. Great session. Two questions. In France, you have like now the Nutri-System with Serge Herberg. We did like the Nutri-System. What do you think it could be export, or because like it's all the Union Européenne who use it now? And the second part is for the sponsorship. It's coming back to the financing of sport, financing of, I mean, it's the industry working with the sponsoring, resourcing to try to give like $2 for a lot. I mean, they receive like $2,000 for the $2 they give it to back. But we rarely talk about like the financing of school, of activity, of, I mean, you ask for sponsorship for a reason.
So just a couple of thoughts. First, I remember when I was a med student at U of T in the 90s, and I had a balcony that overlooked the waterfront, and I always looked forward to the Benson and Hedges Symphony of Fire that occurred there. And it was terrific. I could sit on my balcony, put on the radio, watch the Symphony of Fire. And I remember when society decided, you know what, maybe we shouldn't be allowing tobacco companies to fund the arts. There was a lot of pushback, with one of the main concerns being, well, how are we going to have these lovely things if we don't have the money from the tobacco company? We managed. Now, I'm not suggesting I have a clear solution, because I don't. But the bottom line is that I do think that we're resourceful. I do think you can fundraise. There's so many ways to fundraise without junk food. But I think that they take energy, champions, creativity, and that's challenging. And again, that's where we come into play in terms of trying to encourage change. I know that in one of my kids' schools, I've had the opportunity to speak with the staff on a staff day. I'm going to be speaking for the parent council, but they're trying. And we were able to switch their regular candygrams for Valentine's Day to actually, they used pencils. I thought they shouldn't use pencils. Not so exciting. But all this to say is that you can make change, but it's a real problem because money is tight. And so there are so many ideas online for fundraising that are non-food based. But I think that somebody will step up if the food industry steps down. And whether it's the sports apparel industry, whether it's Canadian Tire, who's already involved in sport, there are people who want to fund. It's beneficial to them. So I think that we're a bit paralyzed with fear, and I think that's unfortunate, but also not surprising.
Hello. And your first question was, I think, about the Nutri-Score system. So that's a different front-of-pack labeling system. My understanding from Health Canada is that they feel that they have some limitations on the constraints of what they can label on the front of packages due to aspects of legal challenges and trade agreements and stuff, which is sort of a separate issue. But so I think in Canada, the ship has sailed in terms of we're going to have a warning label system, and so it's really about implementing the best, most effective warning label system. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting system that has different gradations and seems to be working quite well, so yeah.
Hello. Thank you for all these very interesting presentations, and we all believe that, and we know that nutrition is most important component of this obesity puzzle. We are talking about children mostly, what to do, but this is all imposed by adults. So we need to change adult actions and their perspective, and we should do it as soon as possible, because now in Canada, water is 24 cents per 100 ml, and Coca-Cola is 11 cents per 100 ml. So what actions government or as healthcare professionals we can take today in terms of advertising or convincing these food industry people to fund those kind of actions on a social level?
So I would say when we looked at food company policies, all of these policies pretty much that I talked about fall under their corporate social responsibility. So they do see it as their social responsibility to make their foods healthier and so on, or at least that's how they advertise it and package it to their investors. so I think that they do, they know that, but they don't, they clearly have different incentives than we do, and they have different aims, and we will always have, almost always have fundamentally different aims. So it is challenging. I think that increasing public pressure, one of the aims of this BIA Obesity, and it's developed an Access to Nutrition Index, which is a global indicator of how food companies are doing, and the ATNI is actually very much targeted at investors, basically as an idea that just like there's other sustainability indices and this type of thing, that if investors see that companies are really pushing the bar, that they're rated higher among healthy eating, and if we can shift some of these cultural norms so consumers are increasingly demanding that that's something that investors will therefore see and will incentivize companies to move in that direction more. But it's a challenge because we're just so fundamentally different.
Thank you.
This will be our last question.
Okay. First, I want to say thank you to Kelly for sharing your story and for being so candid. It's always great to hear these stories and to highlight the pressures that, I mean, a lot of us feel, but so many Canadians feel in the choices that we have to make and the limited resources that we have. So thank you for that. I guess my question has to do with the idea of personal choice when it comes to food, because this is a big thing, and this is a lobbying tactic that really resonates with a lot of people, right? That individual choice, personal freedom in their food choices, don't tell me what I can't eat, that sort of thing. So we see that in the marketing and the lobbying, and in this kind of individualistic society that we've created for ourselves, people really grasp onto that. So in something like smoking, and as Dr. Friedhoff said, we decided that it's not okay to have cigarette companies funding certain things, and even though smoking is a personal choice, we decided that, okay, you can make that choice, but we're not going to support that. But when it comes to healthy food choices and that, the wall goes up and says, no, you can't tell me what I can and can't eat at any point. So I'm wondering how, or your thoughts on how we deal with that in this society, because we live in a collective society. We have healthcare that's government funded, so we all have a stake in it. Our society all has a stake in a productive and healthy society, but yet we're all individual, and we want to make all of our choices individually.
I think that generally when I give talks to schools, and I do that a fair bit, I start off and people are where you're describing. They're not in a place where they're willing to accept the fact that, you know what, we have a lot less choice than the world thinks we have when it comes to food and eating. And beating them over the head with slide decks like this is very useful, because it's very difficult to push back intellectually against that. I think that the work that Obesity Canada and others are doing on weight bias is very helpful in that regard too. And to be honest, I do see a lot of positive change. I just think that when it comes to change, we're really stuck in a we want it tomorrow paradigm. And if we take a step back and reflect on the change in the discussion that we're having today versus the discussion we would have had 20 years ago, it's a really dramatic improvement. And I think another 20 years we'll continue to see improvements. So I'm not dejected by all of this like I was when I was a younger, angrier man. I actually think we're doing well. And I think that continuing to raise our voices and continuing to lead discussion always precedes change. And I think that's our job.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think the only piece that we're doing some research right now around social norms and attitudes towards things like sugary drinks. Because, and I know we always pick on sugary drinks and Coca-Cola, but it is sort of a low-hanging fruit, and it's one that we can easily say, don't do it, you don't need it, and here's water, and it comes from a tap, in most cases. And we do see that attitudes are shifting. There's, we just did a 5-country study, and the most commonly the most commonly recalled message from public health messages was, don't drink sugary drinks. So people are starting to get the message. It's not everyone who recalls that message, but people are starting to get some of those messages. And as we increase, as we continue this movement forward, I do think that those attitudes will continue shifting, and then the demand changes, and then it changes the dynamics of it. The challenge with sugary drinks, for example, is, okay, well, do they move to less sugary drinks, or, you know, talk about sustainability and bottled water and all sorts of things. So there's tons of layers, but I do think we see some movement and some shifting.
Thank you to all of our speakers for their great talks today.